Barbara Reiss reporting for Totally East Brunswick. Thank you for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have with us Mirah Becker, who's founder of a very special organization called Second Generation of Middlesex County. Thank you for joining us here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And tell us a little bit about your organization and how it came about.
About 2 years ago, I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and she and I just clicked, and we had about a 3-hour conversation, and it turned out that I learned that her father survived Auschwitz, and my mother was also a survivor of Auschwitz, and we joked about just the idiosyncrasies that we both share, some of which are very dark. I told her if I see a boxcar on a railroad track, I immediately think of my mother being in that boxcar on her way to Auschwitz, and just the dark humor that we kind of share that no one else would possibly be able to understand. And we then were at an affair at B'nai Tikva, and we were joking around our dark humor, and the rabbi at B'nai Tikva, Rabbi Wachtel, overheard us. And we talked with him, and one thing led to another, and I decided to try to put a group together, and that's how it started. And Rabbi Wachtel is the facilitator, and we meet at Congregation B'nai Tikva in North Brunswick.
And for those that are not familiar with the term second generation for the Holocaust survivors, tell us a little bit about what that means and why the group is important to you guys.
Oh, those are great questions. Because a lot of people within the Jewish community have asked me, why second generation? The Holocaust survivors are considered the first generation. We're considered the direct descendants of the first generation, thus the second generation. My children are called third generation, the grandchildren of the survivor, the Holocaust survivor. So that's where the name comes from. And why is it important to me? You know, it's such, I could talk for a very long time about that, but truly, my mother's experience impacted my life dramatically. You know, from a very young age, I knew there was evil in the world. I began to struggle with the fact that I didn't have any family whatsoever. On my mother's side, no grandparents, no aunts, no uncles, nobody. I mean, it was just quiet. And my mom would talk about these relatives growing up, and they came to life, and it was as if I lived with ghosts, and that our house was haunted. It was a very surreal experience. And my mother cried a lot, and she struggled with trauma, and I really felt a lot of pressure to you know, go out in the world and make a difference. And I think that surviving my childhood and then meeting other people along the way who had parents who survived the atrocities of the Holocaust made me realize that we had something to offer, and that it was very important for us to not be scared and to take what we've learned from our parents on the road, so to speak, but also organize within the community and have a group, a safe haven that we could go to on a monthly basis to just talk about what it's like being us, because we are different than your average person.
And you have a picture here of your family from your mom's side. Could you tell us a little bit about who's there and what happened to them? Yeah,
this is a picture that I cherish. I feel like all of these were the ghosts that were in my house growing up. I feel like I know every single one of the people in this picture. This is my mother's family. They lived in Borislav, which was a city, it's still there, based on oil. There were oil refineries in Borislav, and Drohobych, which was another city, sister city across the river, was where the oil came from. So it was natural resources, and today, if you look for Borislav on a map, it is in the Ukraine. And what you have to understand is no one in this picture, these are my grandparents, my great-grandparents, aunts, uncle, wife, husband, survived the Holocaust. And the Ukraine, which was back then called East Galicia, was decimated. I mean, the Jewish community was decimated. Cousins who lived in an adjacent town were one of 54 Jews to survive, these distant cousins, these brothers who now live in Australia. One passed away recently, but these brothers did survive, and one got my mom when he saw her name listed as a survivor of Auschwitz. As a 14-year-old boy, he survived by being hidden by a Ukrainian farmer in a hole for 2.5 years. He and his father and the two brothers lived in a hole. But in this town, this little town, of the 6,000 people, 2,000 Jews, 54 survived the Holocaust. And of the 54, 12 were burned in a barn. They were locked in a barn that they went back to the town to look around, but the people living there, the Ukrainians, were so scared that these 12 people were going to reclaim their property that they put them in a barn, locked the barn up, and burned the barn down. So my relatives got the message, we're not going to go back, these two distant cousins, and they ended up in Australia. But my mom's branch that was in Borislav, no one survived. Nazis came in, Jews were tortured, Jews were beaten, Jews were taken into the woods and shot after they had to dig their own graves and strip. And they were very efficient in getting the Jews out by cattle car, not even first to Auschwitz, but to just death camps like Belzec. A number of my relatives were murdered there, and when they got off the train, it was basically a series of buildings that were all painted lovely colors with signed showers, and the people went in and were gassed to death, and no one was sent to a labor camp like in Auschwitz. You either went directly to the gas chamber or you went to the camp portion of the camp, which maybe if you were lucky you could live 6 months. Before dying of starvation and disease. And my mother had some protection. This is her story. Her father was very knowledgeable about how to run the oil refineries. That was his family's business, the shore business. So he was needed by the Nazis and the Krupp, K-R-U-P, company that came in that extracted the oil for the Nazi war machine. So he bought time, and he protected the family. And unfortunately, at the end of the war in 1944 in August, no Jews were going to be allowed to survive. So my mother's nuclear family was intact, but they were put on the last transport to Auschwitz. And because the Nazis, this is August 1944, they were losing the war. They knew they were going to lose the war, but they were determined to get every last Jew. They took the train from the Ukraine up to Hungary. My mom was on this train for days and days. It was awful. People committed suicide on the train, and she was 16 years old. And she arrived at Auschwitz in August of 1944, and she was liberated January 1945. And this woman, Aunt Ada, who I'm named after, was her guardian angel in Auschwitz. My mother was torn from her mother and sister and father, and she saw her mother and sister go directly to the gas chambers. And this woman, Ada, just kept my mother alive. At the very end of the 6 months, she was forced to go on a death march. She hid my mother, and they liberated the camp maybe a few days later, and my mother survived. And this is important. My mother told me I did not want to live. She was sure that everyone was dead. She had no hope. she was done, and she refused to eat. And because she refused to eat, she lived. Because when the people came in, the Red Cross, they didn't understand that everyone's GI tract was all messed up, and they were giving people too much food, and people literally were dying after surviving because they couldn't eat. You know, you had to slowly bring people back to a normal diet. You had to start them slowly with fluids, etc. So by my mother saying she wanted to die, she lived, and she said that was that was the turning point for her, that she felt like, you know, she would go on and she would build a life, and that her revenge would be to live a life well lived, and that, you know, she basically was successful in doing that.
In fact, this other picture that we have is a testament to that. She started a whole new family.
Yep, she started with nothing. She came over to this country alone, and she is a very bright woman, and when she was living in Munich after the war in a Hebrew high school for orphans, she did so well there. They asked her if she might want to apply for a scholarship for Holocaust survivors that Brown University in Rhode Island was offering at the time, and she jumped at the opportunity, and she got the scholarship, and she came over, and she was sponsored by a family, and she met my father in graduate school at Harvard. So she's brilliant.
It's a beautiful story. In the end, there was thank God there was a good ending.
It was a good ending for my mom.
For your mom. Now, the importance of, we could speak for many hours on this important topic, but we do want to let people know that your group is a resource for them, and that there is an upcoming a statewide event for those that are family of Holocaust survivors and that want to find out more. First of all, if we want to get in touch with your group, how do we do that?
Okay. We would love anyone who's interested in the Holocaust, anyone out there who might be a child or an adult child of a Holocaust survivor, to contact Congregation B'nai Tikva and call this number, 732-297-0696, and you can leave a message for me, Mirah Becker, or Rabbi Walkoff. And we'd love to, you know, bring you into the group, and I think it's a great resource, and we are always looking for new energy.
And the statewide event for those that
The statewide event, there's a state commission on Holocaust education, and the executive director's name is Paul Winkler, and he's amazing, and he's put together a conference for the entire state. It will take place June 10th. And you just need to contact the State Commission on Holocaust Education, and it's Generations to Generations. The theme this year, or the theme for this very significant conference, is to bring not just the survivors together, but to bring second-generation people together as well as the third generation, because this is the key. The survivors are dwindling, the numbers are dwindling. My mother can't go out and speak in the high schools like she used to. So it's critical that the second generation, if they have parents who are survivors who are still alive and they don't know the story, to get their story. And then this conference will have a track that will train people to go out and speak in the schools, because our fear is that unless you get the personal testimony, and I have a lot of stories that are very disturbing but real and valuable about genocide that my mom witnessed and the effect of learning that stuff on me, and unless you get those personal stories and hear and can relate to the person telling you these stories, our fear is that people will just forget about the Holocaust, and the Holocaust deniers will just continue to grow in number, and that in 25 years we'll be in a position where no one even remembers that it happened, and the few who do are fighting with the majority who thinks that it couldn't have been that bad. Come on. So I think it's very important that the personal piece of this puzzle be nurtured, and that the community nurture it, our group nurture it, the schools nurture it. Because if we lose that voice, we may very well wind up where people do forget and genocides continue to happen in this world.
Well, it's good we spoke, because in April is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and so this is an apt way to commemorate that event, and we really thank you for your time. It's been a very meaningful discussion, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
I look forward to coming back anytime you need me.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
If you stay with us, we have another important guest to join us to speak about being a child of a survivor and what it means to them. Thank you. We're back now, and we're very fortunate to have with us here today Professor Shirley Wachtel and her son Howie Wachtel. Welcome. And you have a wonderful book that came out recently, My Mother's Shoes, a memoir. Could you tell us a little bit about what the book is about and how it relates to the Holocaust?
Sure, I'd be glad to. The book is My Mother's Shoes, and it's written in 3 voices. It's written in the voice of my mother, who was known as Blima in Poland. She came from a town of Dąbrowa, and it traces her experience in the war. And then in an alternating voice, that of Betty, which is what she was known as in the United States, it goes on to really show the impact of that experience on the rest of her life. The third voice in the book is my own. It's Shirley, her daughter. And truly, this experience had an impact on my life, a great impact on my life. And it really weaves in through all the years how that has affected, in fact, the whole family, and really has provided, her experience has provided a trajectory, I think, for all our lives.
Now, your son is here as well. Tell us a little bit about how, I guess, your grandmother's experience has shaped your choices in your life.
Well, I mean, I think I remember from when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, how while she was still alive, I would just flip through not necessarily history books, but some of those Time Life magazines, looking at different historical pictures. And I remember sitting on a couch with her, just looking at all the different pictures, and she was explaining different things to me. And I think at a very young age, that's something that played a role in influencing what I was going to do with my life. And today I'm working for the State Department at the United Nations. And so I think from a very young age, I was influenced by just sitting down with her, looking at different pictures, and wanting to do something like that with my life.
And in the book, you mention often that your mom had a very strong personality, a strong will. How does that affect you and your life and the legacy that she has left for you?
Well, actually, when my mother was growing up, she was known as the weak person in the family because she had a habit of fainting at every, event that startled her. And the mother I knew, it was hard for me to come to terms with her being a survivor because she was my mother. She was, protective of us, but she was kind and gentle, and I didn't necessarily see that strength, which she liked to call iron, come through. Even though I knew it was there, I only saw it when my father passed away, and she was remarkably stoic, strong, and continued a life of her own. And that strength, I hope, has translated to the kind of a person that I've become as a result. I feel that it's my obligation to talk about what my mother went through, what my father went through. My mother was one of 3 to survive out of a family of 8. My father was the only one to survive. He lost his entire family. And so I think it is important that we talk about these things, and we provide a balance in our lives between that loving, caring side, but one that strong and resilient and independent, and that's really the message I wanted to give to my children.
Mm-hmm. And in the book you mentioned, when I leave, no one will know her, no one will know my mother. Mm-hmm. But you've actually made that's not going to happen. Why was that important for you?
Oh gosh. My mother was such a presence in my life, and towards the end, we start out, it was the present day. My mother passed away in 1999, and she was in a nursing home, and she had Alzheimer's, and I just felt this was a remarkable woman who had a remarkable story, and it was important to get that story out, get the story of both her and my father out, and that's when I actually sat down to write.
Mm-hmm. And I think also you mentioned from an education point of view, the generations, now you'll be the third generation. What's, for your kids, what do you want to impart to them about the Holocaust and about your own family's experiences?
Well, I mean, I think that the first lesson is what you hear about most often, the idea of just never forgetting about the Holocaust. As we move farther and farther away from the 1940s, it's becoming more and more of a statistic rather than a personal story. And as we lose survivors, as there are more and more people from that generation who are no longer with us, it's just a reminder to all of us that we have to kind of keep the idea fresh in our minds, that this is something that actually happened, that it was tragic, and that it shouldn't be forgotten. But I think, equally, I think it's important to kind of give yourself a sense of perspective. I know, for me, no matter what problems I may have in my day-to-day affairs, everything pales in comparison to what my grandparents and their families had to go through. And on the other side of that is the sense that, it means that everything I'm doing is just that much more important, because my grandparents survived just so I could have the life that I have today, and so it adds extra value to every choice I make, every decision I make, because I want to make sure that it's what they had in mind for their grandson and for their daughter's family every day.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the next question basically is, for those that are not familiar with the book, your mom went through a lot of experiences that no one could ever imagine. I mean, how do you make a transition to U.S. life? How do you manage that transition? I think people forget that as a survivor, it doesn't end with the Holocaust. There are other repercussions after that. So could you explain that to the viewers?
Most definitely. When my parents first came to this country, back then in the late 40s, early 50s, they were known as greenhorns, and the immigrants were not welcome. Today we do try to keep the message alive, but in those days, people didn't want to know about it. They didn't want to be reminded of the past. But in fact, the past lived inside of them. And so, they did what they had to do, because you have to remember, they were the survivors. And because of that, ultimately, their outlook was quite optimistic. I know there are some survivors who did not, have such a positive outlook, but my parents did, and for them, what did that transition mean? It didn't mean dwelling in the past, but in fact looking towards the future. And I've done studies about second generation and whose parents have survived the Holocaust and other catastrophes, and we find that there are many things in common. There's the idea of the importance of education, the importance of family, and these are, I think, what my parents instilled in me, and again, what I try to instill in my own family, as well as the classes that I teach.
Mm-hmm. Now, your father was a hero to a lot of
Yes.
folks. Tell us a little bit about your father.
Sure. Well, I was, I would be walking down the street with my father, and strangers would come up to him and embrace him. And I often, that's kind of startled me. And it turned out because he had saved many of them. He ran the black market. He was in the Lodge ghetto. And he was, he helped people. He helped people to survive by getting them the necessities. And towards the end of the war, when they were breaking up the Lodge ghetto, he was supposed to be sent to Auschwitz. He was sent to Auschwitz, not for very long, but when he was in the selection, where they decide who's going to be a worker and who's going to be not be saved, they sent my father to a particular line, and my father was smart, and he didn't like the looks of that line. So he quickly ran to the other line and thereby saved himself, and we wouldn't be here today if not for that one split second of action.
Amazing. And your mom's experiences, she was taken away from her home. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my mother was actually the first one taken from her home, and she was just grabbed off the street. She was working in a bakery, and she was on her way home, and her mother was standing in the front, and she was just taken by the Gestapo and thrown into a car with her mother running down the block after her. And my mother would, recount this story several times to us. And she was sent to a work camp. There were no gas chambers were not set up at that time. So in the work camp, she was asked if she could sew, and she knew that she better say yes. And she was very, very fortunate that one of the guards there, Gisela, actually saved her life by giving her bread every day. She took my mother as her own daughter, and my mother never understood why, but she was lucky.
Very fortunate.
Yes, and she spoke about Gisela, till her dying day. These are the people who are righteous. They step out of their comfort zone, and they take a very big risk to help others. And the debt that we owe these people is just, priceless. It's very important to keep talking about this as the years go by. People tend to forget, and we cannot afford to forget.
Yeah, I know you're very involved in education. How do you make this accessible for the younger generation?
Well, certainly make it a part of every classroom. My book also actually is on the list of required books from the New Jersey Holocaust Commission. And so we are getting word out to the classroom. It is mandatory that teachers do impart information about the Holocaust now. And just to keep talking about it and keep talking to people on a one-to-one basis like we're doing now, because it really makes it real, especially when there are deniers out there to this day, when the world is filled with anti-Semitism. And, it's not just Jews we're talking about, it's every race, the problems in Africa, throughout the world, and really we have to start to understand that we all belong to the same family, and that's the family of man.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. And thank you for joining us for Totally East Brunswick. This is Barbara Reiss. Thank you for being with us this evening.